Good morning, everybody. We're about to get started in a minute. Our webinar today is Customer Disrespect, Do We Cause It? So thank you for joining us. And within the next minute, we're going to get started. I'm Andy Gohl. I developed the urgency-based selling system, and it looks like we're ready to get started. So welcome, everybody, to the webinar. We have a radical thesis today that, we're sending, let me see. We are sending an engraved invitation for disrespect at times when we think we're doing good. That's what we're going to explore, why it happens and what we could do about it. So it leads to the prospect sending us go away messages when really they should be inviting us in. The ideas you're going to hear, many of them are in my new book, Innovate Now, Scale Up with 16 Breakthrough Sales Techniques. So if you signed up for a Quiet Tame seminar this morning, forget about it. This is going to be a roller coaster ride, lots of fireworks, and my advice to you is fasten your mental seatbelts, because here we go for a deep plunge into the world of urgency-based selling. Now, there are two types of tough buyers that you would face, and I'm excluding total jerks right now. The first kind, they're set. Like, let's say they're buying cartons. They have an A, a B, a C supplier. Well, the A supplier gets 60%, the B supplier gets 25%, and if I did my math right, the C supplier gets 15%. Now, they're open to change if we act properly when we get to know them. But if we don't approach them right, we're the D supplier, we get tortured if we invite getting tortured. So we're going to talk about how do you approach this kind of a buyer? And again, we're assuming they're not a jerk. And the second kind of buyer we're going to look at is the professional buyer. Now, the difference between the first and second type is the first type is typically not as exhaustive. And you'll see that later in the webinar when we talk about the exhaustive professional buyer. So how can we be giving somebody an invitation to be their doormat? You know, in the beginning, maybe they're open-minded, but maybe we do something and the outcome is they treat us disrespectfully. So let's unpack that and see what's involved. First, let me mention the central paradox in selling. I find this amazing. The prospect expects us to be responsive to them, but they tend to interpret responsiveness as neediness. So every time we take 2 steps forward, we take a step backwards. They wonder, can they make a fire sale here? So I want to approach this discussion by talking about neurotransmitters and selling. There are 2 key neurotransmitters we need to affect when we're doing our selling or persuasion. One is dopamine, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter, and the other one is norepinephrine. That's the flight or fight to stress neurotransmitter. Now, we're usually pretty good at administering dopamine, which is the feel-good transmitter, and not so good at norepinephrine. Now, when we don't administer the norepinephrine, it encourages the prospect, instead of having a reasonable balance, we encourage the prospect to look for a fire sale. Why? Because it's a buyer's job to grind us into dust. It's a buyer's job to grind us into dust. And when we don't administer norepinephrine, we encourage bad behavior. Now, another way to look at why this happens, is the unlevel playing field. If we're trying to close a new account and our competitor is seen as a trusted advisor, and your company is trying to break into that scenario on a transactional basis, on a single transaction, it's an unlevel playing field. And this is why buyers behave. This is another explanation of why buyers behave the way they do. And what we need to do is level the playing field. So if it's not likely, if we're a trusted advisor, how do we become a trusted advisor? That's something we're going to explore as we go forward. Now, we each have a job, buyer and seller. The prospect's job as buyer is to grind us into dust so we're seen as a commodity. Our job is to brand ourselves and stand up for our offer. Now, the first 15 minutes of the first conversation are so critical because the buyer tends to put us in one of two buckets. Hey, I want to get to know you, or B, doormat. And what we do in the first 15 minutes are so critical. Now, most of us are pretty good at being the good cop. Great service, responsive, whatever you want. We want people to like us. Now, at this level, only this, we're talking about a customer service rep. What is often missing or is not administered enough is the bad cop, with the key idea that it has to be fair. So could we be encouraging the prospect's bad behavior by not administering enough bad cop, just too much good cop? Let's look at PIKs, which I've circled here. By the way, it's not either good cop or bad cop. It's a balance between both of them. We need both good cop and bad cop, both I like you and I respect you. So let's take a look at PIKs now for a moment. A PIK, a payment in kind, is what the prospect does to show they're engaged in the interaction, that there's fairness. Let me give you some examples. And these differ by businesses, so it could be different in your business. If you're not dealing with the CEO or the owner, they introduce you to the CEO. They visit our facility. They give us a tour of their facility. They fill out a credit application. They check a reference. They show us a competitive quote. They agree to do a lunch and learn. All of this is non-price negotiation. Another way to look at this is if you go for PIKs, payments in kind, from the very beginning of the interaction, it's much easier when you get to talking about price because the prospect is participating, they're not a spectator. Now, if the PIK is reasonable, it's often essential to hold the prospect to the promise. In other words, if a prospect says he or she they're going to do something, we need to make sure they do it. And this is why selling can be like Texas Hold'em. More on this later. Let's go back to the central paradox in selling. The prospect expects us to be responsive, but they like to interpret responsiveness as neediness. We're hungry. We need them. So if every 2 steps forward, conceivably we take 1 step backwards. PIKs, payments in kind, help resolve the paradox. We sell strongly from the outset, and we ask the prospect to be fair. That's what's going on here. We ask them to do behaviors that are fair. Now, will the average buyer offer us PIKs? No. We need to earn the right to the PIK. So the rule of thumb in selling is ask for the strongest PIK to which you've earned the right. Now, if you're in a scenario where it's a multi-call close, it's not a 1-call close, one of the best things you could do is book your next appointment right there when you're belly to belly with the prospect. That's a great way to fill up your calendar with high-level meetings and save yourself a lot of time. And that can often be a strong PIK. So how do we earn the right to the strong PIK so the prospect's not treating us like a doormat? One way to do it is to show the prospect how they're on a false summit. So think about a prospect. They've accomplished something in their life. They're on the smaller of these 2 peaks, but they're looking down. And we in selling, we see a higher peak of well-being. So the essence of persuasion is the prospects looking down, they're on a false peak, and we help them look up. And how do we do this? We do this with type 3 knowledge. What is type 3 knowledge? There's 3 types of knowledge. Type 1 knowledge is what you know. Type 2 knowledge is what you know you don't know. And type 3 knowledge is what they don't realize they don't know. So we're guiding them into a better future with type 3 knowledge by helping them look up and see there's a higher peak of well-being. That completely changes the fundamentals of the interaction, going from what might be called a red ocean of red ink, if you've read Blue Ocean Marketing, to a blue ocean. Now, many salespeople won't challenge the prospect at this point and get him to look up. The prospect says, I'm good. I'm set. I have my A supplier, my B supplier, my C supplier. I don't need you. And here, our value system kicks in and can really hurt us. Too many salespeople are social sellers. All they care about is they want people to like them. They like the dopamine part of the equation. And I use for that Dale Carnegie's as a metaphor, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And what they're missing is the norepinephrine, the business values, which means I want to earn the right. I want to earn the right to your profitable business. And it's not either or, it's both. But again, if social selling swamps business selling, if dopamine swamps norepinephrine, we typically don't close any customers, or we bring them in on a non-profitable basis. So here's a thought question going back to the false peak or false summit. If we see clearly that the prospect is on a false peak of well-being and we don't challenge their thinking, are we doing them any good? I would submit to you we're not doing them any good. We're almost acting like we don't care about the prospect, and for us to succeed, we need to care. So now let's say you want to break through and use some of these ideas. I want to offer you a formula for breaking through to earning the right to the PIK. What's the formula? A compelling reason, a bold vision. A bold vision will pull them into the conversation, but then their native skepticism will kick in. So we have to offer proving. We have to prove, and that gets us to a breakthrough move. And how do we know it's a breakthrough move? The PIK. So there are two kinds of conversation, safe and serious, safe and serious. In a safe conversation, you're never going to get a stick of business. The prospect is most likely in that conversation to try to get a better price. In a serious conversation, the prospect is intrigued with your compelling message and they're willing to explore as they're a fit. Serious doesn't mean you closed, serious means you opened. And how do you know you went from safe to serious? Look at the PIK. Once you've achieved that, the only question is, when do you want it? When do you want to move forward? So let me give you a case history that illustrates this and helps you focus on 4 transformational words. These 4 words will absolutely change your life if they're new to you, if you haven't lived by them. What are those words? Bold vision, bold behavior. Are you bold enough in your vision? Are you bold enough in your behavior? So bold behavior is needed to, in effect, administer or get across the bold vision. Because when we see there's a higher peak of well-being, the prospect says, I'm good. And if we give up at that point, the situation's not going to change. The prospect's going to be on the false peak, and we're going to not have the sale. It's lose, lose, lose all around. So a story that illustrates this point, how I got into this crazy business of sales training, sales coaching. How did I get into this business? So my first business, I was selling packaging, decorative tin packaging on a commission basis. And in 1993, which is a long time ago, like the time of Noah's Ark, I hired a new accounting firm. They tried to sell me one of their products. It was a 1-hour presentation. It was a proprietary cash flow spreadsheet. And at the end of the presentation, I said to Bert, who made the presentation, Bert, is this how you usually sell? And he said, yeah, it was pretty good, wasn't it? And I said, Bert, I think it needs work. So I thought this over maybe for a week or two. I called Bert up and I say, Bert, he's a CPA in a CPA firm. I say, Bert, you and your 6 partners, you need to hire me to teach you how to sell. Now, I don't know what you folks know about CPAs, but they normally don't go for wild out-of-the-box things. So they invited me in, the 3 named partners in the firm. They invited me in for a conversation. And this is how the conversation went. They were on one side of the desk of the table. I was on the other side. They say, so Andy, have you ever worked with a CPA firm before? No. Oh, okay. Do you have any testimonial letters to show you the success you've had with the program you're proposing? No. Have you ever done this program at any time for anybody, anywhere? No. Do you have some curriculum you could show us to give us an idea of what you would teach us if we hire you? No. Then what the hell makes you think you could do this? I say, it's very simple. I saw you sell. It was like here, it could be here, and I could close the gap. That's what I said. Well, they actually liked some of my ideas. They heard primitive forms. This was 27 years ago. They heard primitive forms of what you're hearing now. So they decided to take me out on a sales call. My instructions were to my lips, look, listen, and we'll debrief afterwards. Maybe I could show them how I could help them. So for the first hour of the conversation, they were trying to close a manufacturer who needed their accounting done, did about 30 million in sales. For the first hour of the conversation, I followed the instructions, but then I couldn't take it anymore. And so I raised my hand, the CPA partners melted. The owner of the business said, I was wondering if you were going to say something. You've been so quiet there. So I asked two questions. And with those two questions, I closed the business. I closed the business for the CPAs. And believe it or not, that's all it took to launch this business here. My sales training consulting business was asking two questions. Well, about a month later, the CPAs hired me. During the 6 months that we worked together, their closing ratio went from about 25% to 80%. Accounting Today is a trade publication for the accounting profession, and they wrote a front page article. You see a copy of the first page of it. A front page article here went onto another page. This is Bert, and this is me. And so 4 transformational words: bold vision, bold behavior. If you're not getting what you want, if a prospect's not treating you respectfully, you might well ask yourself, were you bold enough in your vision? And were you bold enough in behavior, which means you have to stand up for yourself. So how do we apply this in the breakthrough formula? Oops, I was clicking the wrong way. Sorry about that. So how do we apply this in the breakthrough formula? What was the compelling reason the CPAs wanted to increase their close rate? What was the proving? I closed the sale for them. They saw it happen. That's what made a breakthrough safe to serious. And when did they want it? They wanted it right now. And the PIKs were, they hired me. And ultimately, we got written up in Accounting Today. So that's an example of going from safe to serious. That's an example of bold vision, bold behavior. Are you bold enough in your vision? Are you bold enough in your behavior? Now, once we've made a breakthrough, we can go through the PIK. I wanted to give you a sense of how this looks in a process. If any of you are into process and you're looking perhaps to benchmark your process. The urgency-based selling system has a standard sales call with 3 parts. The first part sets up the serious conversation, and that's where bold vision, bold behavior, and some amount of proving gets you into a serious conversation, which allows you to do fact-finding. In the fact-finding, you're discovering what do you need to know to close the sale. We call these things the must-haves or the closing conditions. The closing conditions are the series of conditions which, when met, result in the sale. And then once you know what the closing conditions are, you can prove we have the right answer. And you'll notice down here, step 17 is the payment in kind. So warm up, create a serious conversation, do your fact finding, prove your case. And if it's not a one call close, you go for the PIK. And note, we always want to ask for the strongest PIK to which we've earned the right. So always ask yourself, have I earned the right to this? Now, if you find that a price concession is essential in your work, I wanted to offer you an idea. If you're not doing it right now, go for the PIK, go for an introduction. For instance, here's a script. The prospect asks you to cut your price. He or she says, sharpen your pencil. I say, I can't cut my price because I gave you a fair price, but I can take some of it in a non-cash form. So here's what I'm willing to do. I will reduce my price 3% if you'll give me 5 warm introductions. So what I'm saying here is if you ever have to discount, this should actually lead to increased profitable sales if you use this method, because now you're being warmly introduced to somebody else. What we're going to turn to nextly very quickly is the professional buyer. Before we do that, I have a moment or two for a question. Does anybody have a question they want to send in the chat? I'll just wait a moment here. If there are no questions, I'll go on. Here's a question that came in. What if I already have a bad relationship? How do I fix it? I'm going to ask to hold that question because I hope to cover it in the next part. What if I have a one-call close is a question here. What if I have a one-call close? That is, I come in, I present, I walk out the door. Are there PIKs in a one-call close? Yeah, I would suggest to you questions you ask, getting real answers to questions could be in a form of a PIK. Also getting introductions to other people. All right, we're going to move on now. Are we just a price check? I want to go to what I call Tom the buyer, the professional buyer. How do you earn respect from Tom the buyer? So let's meet Tom. Tom was a buyer I played against, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. He bought $100 million a year of stuff, and his company paid its bills. They paid their bills. So how did Tom buy? Let's talk about how Tom the buyer bought. If he's researching a category, he's never bought your product before. Let's say there are 50 vendors in your category. How many do you think he reaches out to? A normal buyer, the previous one we talked about, you know, the A, B, C, D, he might call 3 or 4 people. Tom the buyer reaches out to all 50. So he sends a request for information to all 50. He asks, when are you busy? When are you slow? How much can you produce in a day? Do you work 1 shift, 2 shifts, 3 shifts? Do you work weekends? Is there a slow season, a busy season? All this stuff. Now he's got like a 10-page request for information. Does everybody respond? Absolutely not. Maybe 8 to 10 respond. Now the RFI, the request for information, becomes an RFQ, a request for quote. Now when he sends out this RFQ, this request for quote, is everybody going to respond? Absolutely not. Why? He asks 5,000, 10,000, 15, 20, 50, 100,000, 1 print, 2 prints, 3 prints, or however you differentiate your product. He asks for you to quote it all these different ways. Expedited lead time, regular lead time, you know, slow season, busy season. Now maybe only 4 to 6 quote. But think about this. This is the professional buyer. Whereas your typical buyer, he or she calls 3 or 4 people, and some of them may be interested, and some of them may not be interested. Tom the buyer, this professional buyer, he's only dealing with highly motivated people. So he gets in very aggressive quotes, and this is what he does. He takes the best price, he takes the best payment terms, the best lead times, and he creates what we call the composite offer. So then he says, I'm giving you market feedback. In other words, he lies to you. Now, if he doesn't want to lie, he could just say, this is my strike price. Now, what Tom has done at this point is he's created an offer that's probably below the bottom of the market. Now, Tom is not a bottom fisher. Tom considers bottom fishers wussies. What Tom's looking to do is create a new bottom to the market. So the professional buyer is not happy unless he, she, they, unless their department creates a new bottom to the market. Now, Tom claims he's working on our behalf. He says, give me your best offer. I like you. I'm trying to include you in this. I want you to be involved. Now, what Tom wants to do is stab us in the back. Well, the field narrows. Maybe there's only 3 or 4 people left playing ball, and he's already broken through the bottom of the market. And an essential feature of this is no commitment. Now, a smart salesperson would say, like, if they charged $1 and the buyer says, hey, could you do it for 97 cents? A smart salesman would say, if I could get you 97 cents, do I have a purchase order? Go ahead, fill it out for 97 cents. I'll put it in. I'll try to get it for you. But what Tom the buyer does is he goes so far below the market price. You can never do, this is called the sharp angle close. You know, do you have it in red? Do you want it in red? You can't do this with Tom because you quote $1 and he says 80 cents or 70 cents or 50 cents. So you're never getting a commitment for him. And he keeps on doing this over and over. You keep on coming in with a better price. You're cracking the bottom of the market. And in the middle of all this, as you offer a new price, he comes in and he said, the market just dropped. It took me about 4 years of playing against him to figure this out. Now, this auction continues until nobody wants to play anymore. And by this time, typically, Tom has cracked through the bottom of the market. Now, Tom's in no hurry. He's in no hurry. Right? He'll do this 8 months ahead of when he needs it, which leads to the purgatory of call me back in 2 weeks. Now, if we act like this, is this going to get respect if we're nice people? No, this just leads to more abusive behavior. A quick story. Jane in one of our sessions was complaining about Sue. Sue was always abusive. This is a case of a bad relationship. And we just coached Jane to take a stand. In this case, it was on lead time. The order had to come in by noon to ship that day. And Sue threw in an order at 3 and wanted it. And Jane just took a stand. And from that moment on, Sue was a pussycat. So do you ever face a buyer like Tom the buyer? You know, what's an antidote? Well, one antidote is always play for PIKs. Another is early in the process, work to become a trusted advisor. Use your type 3 knowledge to develop a relationship so that you're not just a commodity to Tom the buyer. Remember, Tom wants red ink, and what you want is a blue ocean of uncontested space. Beware the pitfalls of the Ben Franklin close. What's the Ben Franklin close? Well, you list all the pros and all the cons, and then you say which side weighs more. And on the con side is we typically cost a little bit more money, right? But what happens when the buyer says, I don't see this value? That's why you need to monetize for Tom the buyer, and in general for any selling situation, we need to monetize the value of our product. They're not going to do it for us. We need to do it. We have to monetize. The other solution has higher turnover costs, lost productivity. So even though our product here costs $50,000 more, they make $500,000 plus more from buying from us because of the inefficiencies associated with the other product. You want to avoid the buyer who says, hey, everybody's got great quality and service, so it all comes down to price, sharpen your pencil. We have to form a relationship of trust to discover what it really means to do business with us. So if we go back to the standard sales call, if we create a trusted advisor relationship, one of the ways we know it's a trusted advisor relationship is they will give us the information we need to do the economic justification, right? So if we're in a trusted advisor relationship, it's not adversarial, and we could seek this information. Now, very often selling could be like Texas Hold'em. Tom the buyer doesn't want to pay for the extra value, so we have to show it, and then we go all in. I remember the first year I showed him the extra value, he refused to pay, and I just stood on my hand, and he came back, and he bought from me. Okay, a couple other tips. If the process isn't going anywhere, you may need to escalate. 3 strikes and you're out is one of our policies. If it's not going anywhere, if you try on 3 different occasions to sell a buyer and it ain't going anywhere, escalate, go higher in the organization. After all, the buyer may not be pursuing the interest of the organization. The buyer could be pursuing his or her own convenience. They could be a straight price buyer. They could be a jerk. The owner or the CEO is looking down the road. They care about the company. So if there's no alignment in the best interest of the company, you have to escalate. Now, when does this especially work? When the foxes are guarding the hen house. When the decision maker what you're dealing with is not pursuing the best interest of the company, he or she is pursuing their narrow self-interest. This will help you become a trusted advisor, looking at it from the perspective of the owner or the CEO of the business. Another thought, or a last thought really to think about, is are we humble enough to innovate? Are we level 5 leaders? If you think of the book, Good to Great, you got to be humble. You have to be open to learning. And at the same time, we need to convince the prospect to be humble. So another way to look at this is like the throne of habit. To become level 5 leaders, we have to come down off the throne of habit. We have to ask ourselves, are we humble enough? Are we self-aware? Can we come down off the throne of habit? Grace Hopper, who was an admiral, said, the most dangerous phrase in the language is we've always done it this way. Sometimes we have to challenge the prospect on this. But we all know that Rome wasn't built in a day. So now we've come to the end of our presentation. If you have any questions, you can email me here. My website is www.urgencybasedselling.net. Our next webinar on March 10th at 11 a.m. will be Align Yourself with the Path of Growth. How do you make it easy, like the snowball effect, to open new accounts? So thanks again for joining us here today. We've had I think, a strong seminar. I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, a reminder, I have a book, Innovate Now. You can find it on Amazon.com or BarnesandNobles.com. And please reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks again. I'm going to end the webinar now. Bye-bye.